Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, I am very pleased to be back in Rift's Earth again, looking at the second Savage Rifts book, the Gamemaster's Handbook. I don't know why they put a space in the middle of Gamemaster. Some people think it's two words, I guess. Anyway, that's... So, Rifts, as I have discussed before, is my favorite role-playing game setting of all time. I've been into Rifts since the very first edition of the very first book that was published way back in the 80s. Absolutely love it. And Savage Rifts takes that setting and updates it into the Savage Worlds game system, which many people find to be a lot more smoother playing, a lot more enjoyable, certainly a more modern game system. I really love what they've done with it, and I think it's great. So, we've talked about the Tomorrow Legion Player's Guide. This is now the Game Master's Guide. And let's take a look at what is inside of it, because it offers a bunch of neat things that I think are very valuable. First of all, it talks about... There's a good description of Rift's Earth itself, right? The player's book is primarily focused on character classes and gear and equipment and things like that. What you get here in the Game Master's Guide is all of the world information. Who are the major factions? What are they like? And then a specific focus on North America. The original Rifts had world books that covered most of the planet, and in fact several other planets as well. Savage Rifts is still a little younger of a game system, and so they're still focusing on the kind of default setting of North America. But they give good information on it. Not only what it's like to live there, but then who are the big major factions. All of this is really solid information that you will be glad to have if you are not the Rifts nerd that I am and have all this information going back ages ago. So then you get into kind of descriptions of... It's called the Heartland, but what it is in practice is a very detailed description of the Tomorrow Legion and of the Coalition States and of the Federation of Magic. The Tomorrow Legion is their default player backstory good guy faction thingy. And much of this book is written with the assumption that the players will be part of the Tomorrow Legion. Now, as I discussed in my previous review, I think that is the least interesting option for the players to be a part of, because the world is so rich and it has so many different things and ideas and places, and anyway, if you want to use the Tomorrow Legion stuff, you can. If you want to ignore it, you can. It gets a really solid description here. The Coalition States and the Federation of Magic are two of the primary antagonist groups in North America. And one of the things that is most interesting to me about the setting is that both of them can also be very solid player groups. Now, there's a lot of controversy over whether players could actually be part of the Coalition States. I don't want to get into that here. I think that it's definitely... I mean, they're human supremacists, and they represent some of the worst of human prejudice that we struggle with all the time in the real world. There is something to be said for playing people who are a part of that but opposed to it. But this game assumes that nobody will, because nobody wants to play that kind of thing, and I think that that's fine. In fact, I think that that's good for the most part. But anyway, Federation of Magic is completely different, whereas the Coalition is incredibly technological and, like I said, human supremacist. The Federation of Magic eschews technology entirely for magic, and they are run by a bunch of extra-dimensional beings and dragons and large intelligences and things like that. They have incredibly powerful magic, and it's really kind of cool and interesting. Now, somewhere in here, we've got a map. Think I can find the map? How quickly? There we go. So there is the western half of North America, and there's the eastern half of North America. And I don't know how to make this thing show me both things at once because I am very bad with Adobe Acrobat Reader. But right here, right there on that line is Castle Refuge, which is the heart of the Tomorrow Legion. This is the Federation of Magic. And then up here is where you get into, like you can see, coalition states are all the brown things. Free Quebec used to be part of them. This is part of them. This is part of them. This is part of them. If we go back to this other page, this is all part of them. This over here, Lone Star, that's part of the coalition states. So they're kind of all over and they're spread around. One of my very favorite parts of Rifts, and usually when I'm introducing new players to Rifts and I want to take them through an introductory campaign, we will usually deal with the Shamarian Nation because I think that they're an incredibly interesting group. And so we talk about them, and this book gets into them a little bit, but really you're going to be looking for one of the other Savage Rift books in order to really learn about the Shamarian Nation. Anyway, so they've got 2 chapters here, Savage Rift's Earth, and then the whole Heartland, that are all about setting information. It's all really good stuff, hooray, and that's one of the reasons you're buying this. But I think Chapter 3 is arguably the most valuable one because running Rifts can be very difficult. It is famous for having just an insane power curve. Players, level 1 starting player characters in Savage Rifts can have just absolute campaign destroying levels of power if you are not careful. And so this chapter goes through and is just basically advice for GMs. How do you do this? How do you run this? How do you keep the power level under control while still letting the players have fun? How do you stay true to the world and the system while, without letting things get completely out of hand? And so one of the key parts for that is there's this 10 things to know section. Parts of this are more valuable than other parts of this, but where it really gets good for my money is this section. Don't always plan for the Glitter Boy. The Glitter Boy is one of the most famous character classes of Rifts. In Savage Rifts, they call them iconic frameworks. It's basically a suit of robot armor, a robotic exoskeleton, that has the boom gun, the single most powerful weapon in the game system. Why would you give a level 1 character the single most powerful gun in the entire game system? Because that's what Rifts is like, and that's what Rifts is about. The idea that anything can happen. But then how do you make that work? Does that mean that every single time you fight, it has to be a kaiju or something? No. And that's one of the things this section is talking about. Don't always plan for the Glitter Boy. It can be a good idea to give them something to shoot at so that they feel like they're involved and participating. But that doesn't mean you have to directly threaten them every time. It also goes on to give the advice that you don't have to threaten the Glitter Boy in the Glitter Boy's area of expertise. If someone is a walking tank with an incredibly powerful gun, throw them up against some magic enemies. Throw them up against illusions or mind control, things against which their guns and their armor will be of very little value. And so it gives good advice on how to do that kind of stuff. Don't make the Glitter Boy feel useless. Don't make the Glitter Boy feel overpowered. Just, use a variety of threats in a variety of ways. Similar to that is the next thing in the list. Social challenges are fantastic equalizers. And I do think that that is one of the great GM tricks of any game, not just of Rifts, is if you turn this into a series of combats, Maybe that's what your players are looking for, but most player groups are going to want more variety than that. And so slowing things down, giving them solutions that they can't fight their way out of, conflicts that require them to talk, to negotiate, to persuade, to deceive, which is not to say that every character in the group needs to have really great social skills, but that it is a very good way of balancing the types of encounters and the types of stories you can tell and the types of characters that get to shine. It's very easy if everything you fight is a giant monster designed to challenge a glitter boy, then what do you do with the guy who's playing a rogue scientist and he just wants to be like, the biologist version of Indiana Jones going around and trying to learn about this new world? He's going to be bored. He's not going to have anything fun to do. Or if you've got a character who wanted to play a magic user but decided to focus on illusions instead of on damage, if everything you get into is a fight, she might be bored as well. She's got some neat tricks she can play, but what is she going to do? How is she going to compete with that kaiju? So throwing in social challenges, throwing in other types of combat, other types of encounters are a really wonderful way to make sure that everyone in the group has a job and feels involved and feels necessary to what's going on. And this whole section, Running Savage Rifts, gives really good advice on how to do that. The final section of the book and the largest single section of the book is Savage Rifts Encounters. And this is in some ways just a series of tables that will help you put things together. Like I said, many of these tables and much of this advice assumes that you are part of the Tomorrow Legion, but it's very easy to adapt it to anything else you want to be a part of. If the character is a mercenary group, if they work for New Laszlo, if they work for the Federation of Magic, if they are on the run because they've gone AWOL from the Coalition States, most of these can still be used and can still be applied with very minor tweaks. So it's very solid information. It's really good stuff. Let's take a look, for example, at this settlement generator. And I've got all my dice right here. We're going to generate a settlement right now. So if you as the Game Master are thinking, well, what am I going to do this week in the game? The player characters need to go somewhere, but I don't know quite what to do. Well, you roll a d4. And it says, oh, I rolled a 3. So they're going to find a village. 2d10 times 25. I rolled a 19. I don't know what 19 times 25 is, but it's a few hundred people that live in this village. What is the tech level of this village? I rolled a 4. It's post-apocalyptic. So they are, everything in Rifts is post-apocalyptic, but this is a group, imagine New Vegas from Fallout, something like that. They're scrounging for supplies, but they've managed to stabilize and they're building a new thing. Who lives in this village? 8. DB Separatist. DB is short for dimensional beings. These are aliens or other creatures that have come through the rifts, and they are separatists because they do not want to be part of some other larger group. So maybe this is part of the Federation of Magic, and these are, let's just say, elves. They came from a fantasy world, and so there's a little elven village, post-apocalyptic. They've managed to... a bunch of elves showed up from a fantasy land, and it doesn't matter which one. You can pick a specific one or just say, a fantasy world. These elves came here. They found themselves in a strange new world, and they started cobbling things together, and they ended up rebuilding portions of an old town that they found in the Federation of Magic. Let's say somewhere in Kentucky. Maybe it's a holler that they have rebuilt because they found it abandoned. And so they're just there, and they don't want to be part of the Federation of Magic. They don't like the kind of evil leanings of Lord Dunskin and so on. But while they're there, what is their economy based on? We roll a 2. Farming. Okay. They're elven farmers. That makes sense. What is their government like? We need a d12. Rolled a 6. They're a democracy. and their defense force as militias and soldiers. So, there seems like a pretty good place, right? Now, we are going to throw in some current events, some wrinkles, to our little, old Kentucky holler of fantasy elves that have built themselves a post-apocalyptic thing. This last one, Mood and Current Events, relies on playing cards. And I've got my set of these really cool Rifts-themed playing cards. You don't need those, but it's fun to have them if you're playing Savage Rifts. And let's see. Village draws twice, and we're Village. So, first one is that 10 of Hearts. Hearts means that it is ethical, and 10 means it's a ghetto. Roll denizens again. So, our group of elves in this farming village, actually, I rolled a 1, so it's a human ghetto. There are humans who live in a ghetto in this elven farming community. And that's interesting. Why are they in a ghetto, and what is different about them? We did get the heart, which means it's ethical, so I think the two groups of them get along, but they still remain separate for some reason. And we got to come up with an intriguing reason for that. Second card draw is a Joker. Boom! Story hook, a hero's past or future. So, that's a chance for us to look at our player group and say, okay, well, here is a player who is a human. Maybe they have, we might want to pull some of their backstory into this, but it might be more interesting to look at their future and say that maybe they meet someone. Maybe this guy meets a human woman that he falls in love with in this, ghetto in the elven farming village. And that might help us decide why these humans stay separate. Or, if we really want to be crazy, let's get crazy. Okay, here's how we're going to do this. The reason that the humans live in this little elven community is because this is actually the future. These are the descendants of one of the player characters who saved this village from an existential threat. Something came along and annihilated them, or was about to, until this human player character stepped in and saved them. And because of the weird dimensional time-space flux going on in the Federation of Magic, a group of these descendants, 2 or 3 generations in the future, ended up back in the past, before that annihilation happens. And so our characters arrive there, and they're tooling around, and this gets a little bit into, Hero of Mudville, the man they call Jane, except it hasn't happened yet. This player character shows up, realized that he is not only the grandfather of most of these humans who live in this city, but that they look on him as a savior for something he hasn't even done yet. And that's a fantastic adventure hook, because now the player characters are like, well, what do? We know something really bad is about to happen, so we think maybe we should leave, but we also know that if we do leave, that whatever bad thing is going to happen will annihilate these people, and in fact all of these descendants will disappear. So, anyway, that's the kind of cool story that can come with these tables. I love these kinds of tables, because that's a whole adventure hook that could work really well and give you some really fun things to do with your player group. So, hooray for that. Now, this adventure generator is much more complex and much more robust. It has a bunch of different ideas, and it starts with this mission profile, which again assumes that you're part of the Tomorrow Legion. So you've been sent out to do something. You're on a mission that you've been given. But the mission profile itself is, the adventure generator gets much more granular than that. So for example, here's a survey. Okay? The team is helping the Cartography Rectification Branch, which is a group of Tomorrow Legion, by covering some grids and updating some map information. So then you just go to the next thing and you read the survey, and it says, well, distance. We need to figure out the distance table, how far they have to go. I rolled a 12, so it says 2d6 times 20 miles. Okay? And that will tell you how far you're going to travel, how many days it will take you to get there, and then you will draw cards to see how far you're able, how much trouble happens while you're on the road. And so that is a very simple kind of scenario. You go out, you have to do a thing. Travel itself could be dangerous. What do you find when you get there? And then, there's all these other options, and each of them brings in different things. Maybe you encounter an arcane anomaly. Maybe you find a fade town. What kind of emergency relief do you have to provide? I really like these tables as well. So there's the trouble table. But then there's the encounter table. And some of these options, some of these mission profiles will say, roll on the encounter table. But there's opposition leaders. So if you run into, let's say, the encounter table or the trouble table says, there's a coalition patrol. Well, what is that opposition leader like? And then there's these two, which are mostly just optional. So let's say that we're doing that survey thing, and we have to go out. It said 2d6 times 20 miles. So I got 8. That's 160 miles. That'll take us a few days to get there. We'll have one trouble roll. But then what happens when we get there? Well, we have these two different tables we can roll on. We can go, the plot thickens with a d8. 4, one of the enemy force members has a secret agenda at work. We don't have an enemy force yet. Let's look at if things weren't bad enough. 7, one or more supernatural creatures drawn to strife and violence arrive to prey on any victims they can find. So, there's a group of supernatural creatures hanging out in this area that we're trying to survey, trying to build a map of. But one of them is, they have a secret agenda. Whether that is, they're working against the other supernatural creatures, or they are, trying to do some other thing, or maybe they're not even a supernatural creature. There's so many different options. Anyway, I love this whole adventure generator section, and I'm doing a bad job of giving examples because I don't want to take too much time. But they have actually done a very good job in their book of providing examples. And so there's this, these Savage Tales, Crossroads Crisis, and then Absent Friends, where they go through and they explain, this is what we rolled, and this is how we turned it into an adventure. And so it gives really good examples of not just the kinds of stories you can tell in Rifts, but the kinds of stories that these tables can provide for you. And it's great. There's a huge section on contacts. What kinds of people can you meet? How useful are they to you? There's rewards. What kinds of rewards can you get at the end of a mission? It's not D&D where you just get a pile of gold. It's, is this going to be, are you getting paid, or are you finding trade goods, or are you finding other things? Maybe you just get extra rank in the Tomorrow Legion. Maybe you get upgrades to your cybernetics. Then there's a whole section on ley lines and rifts. And again, lots of tables and different ideas of where is this rift going to lead. Does this take you to another world? Does it take you to somewhere else in our world? How often does it show up? Is this one time, or does it open every 5 hours? Or is it constantly open and enemies are flooding through it? So there's all of these great, great adventure ideas, and there's even this section right here on Rift-oriented adventures. And earlier in the How to Play, there's a section on should you go through a rift or not? Should you travel through them? Should you try to stay on Rift's Earth, or should you take one of these portals to another world? How do you as a game master handle it if the player characters decide that they're going to leave behind Earth and your campaign and go off and start exploring the multiverse? And how do you deal with that? How do you roll with it, or how do you subtly guide them back? Or when do you need to step in and say, sorry guys, I'm not ready for this. Let's deal with the campaign that I'm working on now, and then I promise I'm going to give you a dimensional thing later, Because these are the kind of things you need to talk about as a group so that everyone gets what they want and everyone is, happy and satisfied. So anyway, I really like this book a lot. it is a worthy addition to the Rifts universe, with a lot of really helpful, useful tables and ideas of how to create adventures and how to run adventures and campaigns, which for Rifts can be difficult. It's very easy, as mentioned, for things to get out of hand if the Game Master is not on top of it. It's easy for the power level of the game to run away with things. And so, anyway, that is the Savage Rifts Game Master's Handbook. And if you are interested in Rifts, this is going to be the second one you pick up. You got to get that player's guide first, but then the Game Master's Handbook is very solid and full of very great information. I do want to give an extra little push, an extra little promotion. The original Palladium Rifts line is still available. And there is a book called Aftermath that is basically a setting book that describes North America in incredible detail and the rest of the world in passing detail. It doesn't have much in like mechanical stuff. It's not full of gear or monster stats or anything like that. It is just a pure setting book that describes what the world is like and who are the groups and people and conflicts that you can go and interact with. And so if you are interested in playing Rifts, even though it's not part of the Savage Rifts line, Rifts Aftermath is a really wonderful book to pick up because it is a one-stop shopping spree for all of the setting information you could possibly need. Other books will get a little more granular about the different areas, but Aftermath is just an absolutely beautiful overview of the setting and is absolutely one of the very first books that I recommend everyone get when they get into Rifts, just because of how much information is in it, how much setting detail, and all the rich world that makes Rifts my favorite game setting. So, anyway, there you go. Thank you so much for watching this review. My name is Dan Wells, and you are awesome.